Welcome, Christina. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you on, and I am beyond thrilled given just your powerhouse Latina kind of energy that you bring. And you are known to be fierce and, and breaking all kinds of barriers. And so let's just dive right in and tell us a little bit about who Christina is and your journey and what you've learned along the way.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm actually really excited to be here, and kind of even knowing the background of your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, I think is amazing. A little bit about me. I actually grew up in Cedar Hill, Texas, a little town outside of Dallas. I never kind of imagined getting outside of Texas. Texas seems so big when you live there. But I actually got approached by an organization called A Better Chance that was designed to help give students of color a quote unquote better chance. By getting you a better secondary education, you would get into a better college, you would get a better job and have a better life. And they approached me when I was in junior high after a talent search and offered to send my application to boarding schools across the country. Wow. And try to get me a better secondary education. I ended up getting a full scholarship to a little school in North Andover, Massachusetts called the Brook School. And it really is a very rigorous school, but it was kind of at 15 years old, this monumental thing that happened to me to kind of open my eyes and see a bigger world kind of outside of Dallas, Texas. Doing things like learning how to surf, right? There's no ocean in Dallas, Texas. Going to the New Hampshire beach to learn how to surf, well, it just makes you realize, like, wait, there's so much more out there to have experience and to know that I didn't even weren't even on my radar. And it was there that I kind of developed my love of politics without even really knowing it. I took a government 101 class, basically civics. And I didn't even know the difference at that point about, Republicans and Democrats, and kind of learning in this class what that was made me want to go to Georgetown and learn more about that. And I thought that, I would go to Capitol Hill, I would help write laws, I would change the world. And then I did an internship there, and it was, quite honestly, very boring. And then A Better Chance calls again, and they're like, we've got this partnership program with some businesses on Wall Street. Do you want to come? And I'm like, no, I'm idealistic. I'm going to change the world. You can't tempt me with your Wall Streetness. And they're like, well, it's 10 grand for the summer. I'm like, well, sign me up. I'm good. Let's try it.
Right.
Can't hurt. It's just the summer. And then I got there, and Wall Street was amazing, and it was sexy, and it was fast, and it was like all these things, another whole world that I had never seen, and learning all about finance and debt and equity and how do economies work and how does the market work and what does that mean, and learning all of these things. And so after graduation, I actually went to work for Goldman Sachs and really kind of left myself open to learn all about this. I didn't take any finance classes when I was at Georgetown. And so really it was a brand new education for me until, and I'm Cuban, I saw the Elian Gonzalez story, and that was a big deal. But it was a Cuban boy found floating in the waters that the United States government was going to return back to Cuba. And I thought to myself, like, well, I'm not supposed to be looking up the price of Target for billionaire Bobby, which is what I was doing in that exact moment when Janet Reno sent the FBI in to go get him. I'm supposed to be working on policy and back in DC. And I literally signed up for the LSAT right after that, and ended up going back to DC to go to law school. And now I've been back in DC for well over a decade, about 15 years. And I've, worked at law firms. But I decided, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be in politics. I wanted to be in policy. And I found this thing called lobbying. And it was this way that was actually, wait, I get to do policy and make money? You mean I don't have to pick one or the other? And it was kind of the birth of like all things that I loved in one profession. And I just decided that I loved it, and I really wanted to specialize in that. And so I've been a lobbyist ever since.
Wow, what a fantastic story. And so much of it resonates with me because I grew up in a small town in West Texas. And, you don't realize how sheltered or how limited your frame of reference is until you do go to somewhere that's, much bigger. And when I packed up after I got my master's and moved to New York City, it was like, oh my God, I had no idea what I was missing, and no idea of what the opportunities were out there. So share a little bit about, and you touched on it, about, gaining clarity on your career path and your purpose, because like you said, originally you thought you wanted to do one thing, and then an opportunity at Goldman Sachs presented itself, but then you followed your passions when you heard about the Elian story. So share a little bit about that and what influenced some of those decisions.
I think that it's interesting with our Latino culture. We're really, trained and ingrained and raised to think about taking care of our own. And I love that about our culture in so many ways, right? And I remember briefly a point in my time where me and my mom went to go live with my aunt. And, I remember kind of another time where, my grandmother had gotten ill. So she had come and moved in and what have you. And it's kind of like that time where like when those around you are having troubles, you take them in and you all support each other. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But I think for Latinos, it bleeds into our professional life, our decisions that we make in terms of like, what are we going to do for the rest of our lives, our professions, or how we're going to make money and what have you. And I hear from a lot of young Latinos in particular, like they pick careers that have to do about giving back. And in some regards, that's very noble and it's amazing. And certainly if that is your passion, by all means, please pursue it, right? There are some folks who, that's why they become doctors. They want to help other people that are sick, by all means. But I hear more often than not, especially in Washington, D.C., a lot of folks that want to go do immigration law because they want to help somebody figure out the immigration process because it was so difficult for them. Right. Again, very noble. And if you really have an immense passion, personal passion for the law and immigration law specifically, by all means do that. If that excites you, wakes you up in the morning, you see yourself in the mirror and you're like, yes, that's what I want to do it. But I feel like some people pick this career because it's the only thing they've known. They've had this whole personal story, whether it be an immigration struggle, and now they want to give back and figure that out. And they don't kind of recognize that there's all these other options available to them. But they also kind of, I think, feel a guilt about picking a career or pursuit that would be what some would call the sellout, right? Like that they're just going to go make some money. They're going to go work on Wall Street and be a bank tycoon or an executive or whatever it might be. And I want to say, like, don't hold yourself back because of that illusion, because I don't think that's true. We kind of look around corporate America. We look around, I'm here in Washington, D.C. I look in the policy space and like, there are not enough Latinos representing us in all of the places where decision-making happens, where power is. And I think that that's a problem, right? And because, Latinos make up 18% of the population, and yet we're about 1, maybe 2% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. And I just think, for example, like when you talk about minimum wage, wouldn't that conversation be different if 18% of Fortune 500 CEOs were Latino, if we matched kind of our representation in the community? I just think it would be a completely different conversation if we were part of it, and we simply are not. We're not in corporate boardrooms. We're not in the C-suite. We're not, I mean, we're gaining numbers in Congress, but we're still very far behind. We have like, I think 37 members of Congress out of 435 on the House side and another 100 in the Senate. Like that's simply not enough. We have, 4 United States senators, and we need to be kind of represented. So if a young person is particularly strong in something like Excel spreadsheets and you love numbers and you're all about that, like go get an MBA, go become an accountant, become a CFO, go, if you love the law instead of immigration law, I mean, take a look, like maybe you could become the general counsel of one of these corporations and start advising them on kind of the decisions that they're making and be a different voice, a sounding board, instead of kind of that circular voice that they hear themselves all agreeing with each other if it's all white male, like which is the predominance in corporate America. And so I would just really kind of encourage folks to kind of look at your passions. What are you good at? And if there are other ways to apply that other than kind of maybe that initial draw that you learned as a kid to give back to just your community, and maybe there's other ways. And I've run a nonprofit organization. I was the CEO briefly for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. And I will tell you, I mean, the number one objective of most nonprofits, probably all nonprofits, is raising money to do the thing that is that they are created to do. Yes. And so in CHCI, we want to give away scholarships to bring kids to DC so that they can learn about policy. But we spend probably 80% of our time raising money and 20% of our time actually teaching those kids once they get here. Right. And so now that I have some amount of success, I run my own business, I look forward to writing my checks to all of the organizations that I want to give to, right? So my mom had multiple sclerosis. I write a check to MS Society. I care about Latinos and kind of our next generation. That's why I devote so much time and my money to CHCI and a host of other things. Like, and all of those charities, all of those causes that I care so much about, love that I am there to help write that check and also bring my clients to the table and write checks, right? There are other ways to
Yes.
contribute and give back once you reach a different pinnacle of success.
That is such phenomenal and critical advice. And I think that our listeners, you need to rewind and listen to that part again, because it is so true. When you have more, you can give more. So be strategic in leveraging your strengths and those passions and find out, how can you get what your worth is so that you can give back more. I think that is so phenomenal in thinking about that. So I want to pick your brain a little bit on, you have been a pioneer in terms of, going and being the only in many of these places. And, talk to me a little bit about how you overcame, if you did have some of those fears and maybe limiting beliefs, especially at the young age of 15, going off to boarding school and maybe being the only one who kind of looks like you, and then going off to schools like Georgetown and others where representation or people that look like us really aren't there. How did you overcome those limiting beliefs?
I will tell you, and kind of, some deep kind of thinking on myself. Like I have to admit, I'm very, very open and honest. Cristina Antelo, like it doesn't come across, there's no Z's or X's. So nobody kind of immediately thinks like, oh, she's Hispanic, she's Latino.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, sometimes I feel like I'm the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Like I blend in more easily and people don't necessarily notice. A lot of times they just think I'm Italian. Mm-hmm. And so I acknowledge in some ways that my struggle maybe isn't as difficult as somebody else. Maybe if I were native born somewhere else and I still had a thick accent, or if I had a name that very clearly portrayed that I was different and other, or if I was a great deal darker than I am. I have olive skin, but I don't come across as very dark. Mm-hmm. And so, I can see that. I know that about kind of how people have accepted me, and maybe that is easier. So I take what I'm about to say then with the grain of salt. But I am very cognizant that I am Cuban, right? Like I grew up with Celia Cruz. I grew up with adobo everywhere, in our foods, and eating flan for dessert, like all of those things. I'm very conscious of my culture, and I'm proud of it. I love it. I make it part of who I am. I don't hide it in any way, and it is out there. And I bring it up proactively in different, in different ways. When I got to Brooks at 15, you're right. That was probably the first place where I had to figure that out for myself. I showed up like Punky Brewster. Maybe that was more Texas culture versus Latino culture. I'm not sure. But I had, the big bangs, and I wore bright colors, and I showed up in a Northeast prep school, and everybody there, like their idea of color was like navy and hunter green. And I stuck out like a sore thumb. And I think I started to just be like, there is a way to assimilate without losing yourself. Like you don't have to lose yourself to be able to blend in. And that is a fine line to walk. You have to do it to some extent, and that's part of the game. Like, do I wish we didn't have to, if we're talking about like how we wish life and society were, do we wish we didn't have to put pieces of ourselves away in certain places? Yes. Sure. And if we were aspiring for that, and what kind of, a perfect world would look like, sure, that would be on the list, but that's just not where we are. And I'm here more to talk about practicality, and you wanted to know how I got to where I am. Mm-hmm. You have to blend in to some extent, right? It makes the other people more comfortable in accepting you, and they're then more open to hear your thinking, your ideas, your concerns, and addressing them. If you have made the effort to meet them halfway, then they will be more likely to meet you halfway. Mm-hmm. And so, I dress more like the kids now at Brooks than I did when I was in Texas, right? I do wear, the black and the navy and the grays and stuff like that, but I still have my pop of color. I've always got on bright, cute shoes with big stiletto heels. Like that's the Latina in me that's like, I'm not giving up the shoes, guys. Like I'm going to wear that. And, I still wear jewelry because I like that. And it's usually big gold jewelry because that's kind of, my J-Lo-ness or whatever that is, like that part of the culture. So there's still that. And so it's a mix, right? It is a mix. Like it is easier for people to accept me in that way. And there have been some moments where, there is the very clear, the other. I remember sitting in an interview. I mean, it was as if it was out of central casting, like out of a movie. I mean, a white guy with his puffy gray hair sitting in his like leather armchair looking at my resume, and I'm sitting, like I'm on the couch across the room, and he's like, what is this ABC? And like, well, it's for diverse students. Well, certainly you aren't going to convince me that you're a minority. And I'm like, there must be a way to interpret that so that I'm not offended. I don't know what that is in this moment, but let me pretend as if I know what that is. I'll come to it later and I'll answer your question. I'm like, well, actually, yes, sir, I'm Cuban and, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, you've assimilated well. And I'm like, again, there must be a way to interpret that so that I'm not offended right now, but I don't know what that is. And I had to be like, I guess my blonde highlights are like, make me look white enough to work at your law firm. Well, good. Let me trick you. I'll get in the door and then you watch what happens, sir. Like that was kind of my mentality. And that's kind of been where I was. The same even going to Brooks. I mean, I went to Brooks on a full scholarship and I have no qualms about the fact that they needed help diversifying. They found a really smart Latina that could come handle their rigorous schedule. And I was like, you guys use me for your diversity number. I'm okay with that because I'm going to use you for the best education I can possibly get.
Yes.
And so it's a mutually beneficial symbiotic thing. And I'm okay with that. And now, fast forward 20 years, I'm on the board of the Brooks School because I appreciate that was the most significant educational opportunity of my life.
Yes.
And I hope that I can give that to other people as well. And they need to have kind of a Latino voice to help remind them of that, even in this day and age.
I think that is such phenomenal advice in the fact that, and what you touched on in terms of we do need to assimilate in some way. And I like to call it acculturate, right? You acculturate, and we actually have an advantage because we already start off as being bicultural. You are Cuban American, I'm Mexican American. We basically, know that there's a different culture. We have our own culture. We're living in a different culture. And so I always tell, my clients and my mentees and others that any organization you go into, like when I went to Goldman, realizing that they have their own culture. So I've got to learn how to be bicultural and, when in Rome, do as Romans do, right? What does success look like at Goldman Sachs? You've got to do the same thing. It's not selling out. You're just being bicultural. So I love what you said in the sense of, taking advantage of what they have to offer you. And like you said, it is a symbiotic and kind of like it's a reciprocal kind of, they're giving you the opportunity to learn and expand your frame of reference. And at the same time, you're going to leverage all of that to go, do bigger and better things. And I think that is fantastic. And I think more people need to hear that because there is that hesitation of, oh, I'm going to sell out, or, oh, I'm going to, I'm going to adopt the, bad habits of, the big brother or whatever that might be. But I think, we need to shift that mindset and shift the story that we're telling ourselves and leverage those opportunities. Can you share a little bit about, and this is what you do for a living, right? In terms of like lobbying and thinking about just the brand and the kind of reputation that you have in getting things done. Like how important is that? How key is it to building and being able to tell your story and getting things done?
Everybody kind of picks their own way, and everybody's got a different strength, and everybody, needs to do what is comfortable in their own skin. I remember kind of watching my grandmother. My grandmother came from Cuba to this country. She never learned how to speak English for whatever reason. But, back in Cuba, I mean, she was well accomplished and she was a professor, and she, was a super smart lady. And then she comes here, and because she doesn't speak English, like none of her accolades follow her, none of her education matters. And so she starts at a bank at a very low level, and she works there for the next 30 years at a very low level just because of the language barrier, right? But here is this very accomplished, really super intelligent woman doing very small and menial things. But it was the work. I mean, she got up every morning so early to go work so hard and stayed late. And then, and then at home worked very hard and took care of all of us. And it was like, I saw in her this work ethic that no matter what the circumstance was around her, she was going to accomplish her ultimate goal of making sure she was providing something better for her family. And that was important to her. That was worthwhile. It didn't matter what the menial tasks were at the bank. It only mattered that she was accomplishing her ultimate goal. And I think about that. I'm like, that is tremendous inspiration for me, because I know now, like I feel like I'm smart. I feel like I know a lot of stuff. And I feel like if people kind of wrote me off and made me do like very menial things kind of below my level, I don't know how I would sit with that. And certainly not for 30 years. Like I wouldn't be happy with that at all. And she did it anyway. And that is tremendous, like, and passion for me to kind of go forward and do mine. Like, well, she did all that for me, I better do something with it, right? Like I better take advantage of it. But, you know, so I took that work ethic and I thought about it. And, you know, another thing my dad said to me kind of, you know, and it's kind of like death and taxes. He's like, you know, you're not guaranteed anything, Cristina. You only have the time that you're here and that's it. So make the most of it. And like, you know, it's to the point now where like, I can't sit and watch a movie for 2 hours because I feel like I'm wasting 2 hours. Like I can have it in the background, but I need to be doing something. Like I need to constantly be producing or accomplishing. Accomplishing is the word. And so I took that to heart. And, you know, I remember, and you know, you alluded to it, I think earlier, in the imposter syndrome and what have you. And a lot of us don't feel like we're worthy or what have you. And so there's a piece of me that always kind of feels like, well, I may not be the smartest person in this room or any room, but I know I can outwork anybody. Like I know that.
Yes.
And so even if I don't know already walking into it, XYZ policy, right? Like I don't know healthcare policy inside and out. I don't know what 302Bs are or like Medicare Part D. I don't know all of that stuff off the top of my head. But if I get any one client that cares about any one of those things, I will study it overnight. I will be an expert by tomorrow, and let's charge forward. And I know that now. And I think kind of getting that liberal arts education along the way teaches you that you can teach yourself anything. And so it doesn't matter what you know today, right now, in this moment. But if you tell me I need to know something, by tomorrow, I will know it. I will teach it to myself tonight. And then within the next week, I'll be an expert. And within the next 6 months, it'll be as if it were like a second language to me. And I will just know it inherently. And I will have just developed it as my own skin. And I was like, and so, but that takes work. And so you have to commit to doing that work. And so that, you know, it's kind of, you know, control what you can control. I can control myself. I can control and teach myself and like plan out my hours and go study and do all of the things that I need to do to be able to accomplish that goal. And that is what I like to focus on. Control what I can control. And that is only myself and my time. And I can dedicate and spend my time bettering myself, learning more, or becoming more accomplished in whatever it is I need to try to accomplish.
And let's dig into a little bit about that, because it is some of those daily habits and the rituals that you practice that really have really influenced your career success. So what is, you know, one of the, you know, things that, you know, Cristina does daily that really helps propel you forward?
Whew. You know, I mean, professionally, one of the things that I do that I think helps is, you know, I read every day, and you know, for politics is constantly changing. So you got to stay up with it all the time. And it's funny, I first started doing like TV hits that I would get really nervous and I felt like I needed to study, right? I went to that kind of safe place where I'll go study for my TV hit. They've told me that today's topic is this, and I'll go study that. And I would spend 5 hours studying that topic. To then like a news item would hit and we wouldn't talk about that topic. And instead we were talking about the topic of the day, and I'd have to do it on the fly. And what I realized when that happened enough times was like, wait a second, because of my daily reading, I already know enough to be able to handle whatever they throw at me in any one of these situations. And so it was kind of having that confidence though, but it's like but like staying on top of things, doing that reading every day. And again, that's my profession. Every profession might be different and kind of what's required to kind of stay in the know. But, you know, like, so I get something out of that. And it also makes me feel smart in front of my clients, that I know the latest and greatest, or that I can keep track of like all of the different senators or who did introduced what bill. So that's one thing. You know, I think another thing is that I have 2 little girls and I love them to pieces. But I have tremendous mom guilt now that I'm an old lady, right? I'm not like at the beginning of my career here. But you know, I have that mom guilt, like, oh, do I spend this next hour? Do I go home on time and make dinner? Or do I spend this next hour doing this for my client or whatever it is to make sure it gets out the door today? And so I constantly have that mom guilt. But so I've come to a space now where like, I have given myself permission to pursue what I want to pursue because I'm a good example for them. That's what I want to be for them. But I also make it up in other ways. And I think back on my own childhood and I think back, well, there are these moments, these crystal moments in my childhood that were like impactful. And it wasn't necessarily the day to day, like what did I do every day that I remember, but a big birthday party I remember, like all of my family being there or something like that. And it makes me think back like, okay, well then I'll create big moments for my kids to remember so that in their memories and even on their day-to-day lives, they'll know mom loves them because like mom blows out my birthday. She shows me she loves me because we do birthdays big in my house, right? And so like being able to conquer that. So for my little kids, I have those things where I think about them in ways and I try to give them those moments so that I can also continue to pursue my career without this crushing guilt. Like I have a little guilt every day, but like that's okay. But I don't have crushing guilt that I'm not allowed to pursue that.
Yeah. And I think that's so important because like you said, what you're doing is you are creating that integration, that work-life integration, that you are being strategic in what's going to be memorable for them. But then it allows you that freedom to be able to pursue what you want to pursue. I think that is fantastic. So, in your line of work, making difficult decisions probably is something that you deal with multiple times a day. Tell us some techniques that help you when making a difficult decision and taking risks, because we all know that decisions are hard because when you decide, you divide, right? So, how do you go about making those types of decisions?
You know, it's so funny. I'm going to tell you a little story and then kind of relate it back. So I remember once I'm the junior attorney at my law firm and I have the senior partner with me. We go to a client's building for a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a massive building. We go up for the meeting, we come down. And when we come down in the elevator, it's just a massive elevator bank. I mean, there's probably, 15 elevators that way, 15 elevators that way. And it's just like, but no indication of anything. And I just immediately turn right and we start walking. And we get all the way down to the end of the hallway to figure out we had made the wrong turn and instead we were supposed to go left. So then we start going back. And he looks at me like, why did I follow you? You had no idea where you were going. Like, why did I do that? And I was like, well, we have more information now than we did when we got out of that elevator. So now we know we're going in the right direction. We could have sat there twiddling our thumbs, like hand wringing and been really nervous and scared. Like, do we go left? Do we go right? Do we go left? Do we go right? And not ever make a decision. But at least if I went right, even if it was the wrong decision, I had more information to learn from to be able to eventually go left and exit the building. And it's a simple, stupid example, but it's how I think about everything. I mean, the fact that I instinctively just turned right and went was, I mean, it tells you exactly my thought process. Like, I'm okay making mistakes. I'm okay with it because I will always get more information out of that than if I had just sat around being scared. And I feel like there have been a few times in my life where like I missed out on something because I couldn't be decisive. And that feels way suckier than making a wrong decision.
Yes.
And I just don't want to feel like I missed out because I was scared. Like I don't want to live with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather live with a wrong decision and know, well, I tried. I gave it my best shot.
Yes.
Then I didn't even participate. And so I that's the way I approach most decisions. I mean, even in starting my own business now, Ferox is 3 years old. And I did a little hand wringing on it. I actually had thought about doing it a couple of years before. I thought that, Hillary Clinton was going to win the White House. The Democrats were going to run this town. And like, I would be like, well, perfect timing. Let me go do it. And then Hillary Clinton didn't win the White House. And I was like, oh, never mind. I'll take a moment. Let me stop. Hold on. And I was scared. I was like, oh, I can't be a Democrat in this town if Republicans are running everything now. I guess I better sit on it. And then I had kind of the opportunity came up again and I almost kind of passed it up a second time. And I was like, and it wasn't until this moment where I finally just gave myself permission to fail. And I was like, listen, I can survive anywhere for 1 year. I can do anything for 1 year. And I've got enough savings where like I can make the mortgage, I can feed my kids, maybe with ramen, but nonetheless, I can survive for 1 year. So let me give this a shot. And if in 1 year, this doesn't work, that's fine. I can then go work for another firm. I had been at a firm making somebody a lot of money and I can go to another firm and go make somebody else a lot of money. But for 1 year, I'm going to try to make myself some money and figure this out on my own. And if it doesn't work, that's okay, because I can still go do that other thing. No need to do it right now. And in that moment, it was like, oh, okay, burden relieved. Let me go forth. And if it sucks, then okay, I'm back in this position where I am now anyway. It's the same thing. I made a right turn. And if it was the wrong turn, I could turn back left and go back the other way and it would have been fine. And then, Ferox blossomed. I mean, we had 2 clients on day 1, 3 clients on day 2, and 8 within that first year. And now we're up to 14 or 15. And it's just, and good clients, right? I mean, like Disney and Waste Management and Diageo and like all of these like national names that you've heard of, like nothing clients, like they're cool and they're cool issues. And they like, and they come back every year and they re-sign, right? So like, that's the good sign. Like I'm doing it right. And so decision-making for me now, it's like a sport. I'm like, let's go ahead, give me a decision. Let's do it. What do you got? Because I'm not scared of them anymore.
I love that. And I love the fact of giving yourself permission to fail. And to be quite honest, it's those failures and those obstacles that become the opportunity. And so we just have to kind of be okay with it and just, who cares what others think, right? Just go do it. And like you said, you have more information. You're like, okay, I know that, it's just like, okay, there's 10 solutions. Now I know that, that's not one of them. I have 9 more options. So let's go and get that done. So the other thing that a lot of our women struggle with is access to influential leaders and building a strong community around them. And given your line of work, I mean, you really do have to leverage and nurture relationships in order to get things done. How do you gain access to influential leaders? How do you go out there and kind of build your, relationships and your network?
It's funny in my business feels like it's all relationship and relationship building. And, kind of over the years, I've, met a ton of different people, and I see different styles and all of that. And what works for me and what I think is works best for most people actually is when you build an authentic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And like you see some, young people will go to an event, a networking event, and just go there with their cards and hand out, 30 cards. I'm like, I had a successful night because I handed out 30 cards, and they're like keeping a tally. And I'm like, well, if you didn't actually make any connections with people, if you don't actually know anybody by the end of the night, if there's, not a way that you can go back to any one of those folks to have like a real conversation, I don't know that was actually that successful. So I wouldn't view that as a successful night.
Yes.
For me, like, you may not be able to tell now, I've been training myself over the last decade or so, but I used to hate kind of going to that kind of a room full of strangers and having to introduce myself and figure out how to carry on a conversation. I hated it. Like, it was a chore, and I despised it. And I got better at it as I practiced and what have you. But I would make a deal with meet one person, have one good conversation, and you can leave. You're done for the night, Cristina.
Uh-huh.
And that would be it. And so, and I found that I would make one good conversation, one authentic connection with somebody. And that ended up working out better for me. Because if I did that 4 nights a week, well, then every week I had 4 new authentic good contacts, not 4 events where I dropped off 30, business cards and kind of kept going. And then in that relationship, I think, a lot of people, especially as your career building, or maybe you're like trying to like, oh, I need to start figuring out how to get clients. And you're just thinking about like, how do I get clients or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you start to view and treat relationships transactionally. And that's the kiss of death, because as soon as somebody feels like they're a transaction, they don't want to participate. And they're like, nothing here for me. I'm good. As opposed to, again, developing, an authentic, good relationship. I think I also kind of along the way started to develop a longer time horizon view on things. And especially, I think because I had the comparison of a Wall Street career versus my career in politics. Mm-hmm. And in Wall Street and in a law firm too, by that account, there's this progression that you go through, right? You're supposed to come be an analyst for 4 or 5 years. And if you're good, we'll promote you to associate. And if you're, you do that for 4 or 5 years. And if you're good, then maybe we'll promote you to a VP. And you do that for 8 years. And if you're good, then maybe we'll, like there's this ladder you have to climb. And there's like these time checks. And only if you're good enough do you get to go to the next level. In politics, it's not true. Like, you can be carrying a candidate's luggage, and if they win that election, then you could be their, legislative director, which is like the second highest thing in their office.
Right.
Or you can be, the same thing. Like, there was a body guy that worked for Obama that then, after the election, he goes to work in the White House. You go from being a body guy to working in the White House and being an advisor. And now he's like on a corporate board. Mm-hmm. Like, that blows my mind. And only in DC and only in politics does that happen.
Right.
But nonetheless, so it just made me realize, don't worry about what any one person can do for you today, right now, in this moment. That's not what it is. It's better if you and I build a relationship, keep track of each other. And if, generally speaking, you and I are good, smart, hardworking people, we're both going to progress. Yes. And chances are you are going to end up somewhere in life, and I'm going to end up somewhere in life where we can probably be mutual beneficial to each other in various ways that you and I can't even fathom today, right now, in this moment.
Right.
Right. And it's just like, so just make as many of those good connections as you can, and make friends. And that's the other thing, right? You get this support system that comes along with it as the extra added bonus.
Yes.
and then you have your support system who's invested in you, who's like, I want to see you do well. I want to celebrate you. And now you're up for a promotion. I'm going to go tell everybody who's interviewing you that I think you're awesome. Or I'm going to keep an eye out and be like, oh my God, I saw the perfect job for you. Here it is. Or, hey, you know what, like you're working on funding XYZ. I've got 3 clients that might want to fund the endeavor that you're going to take on.
Mm.
And so it is better again to kind of build real relationships that you invest, but that, I mean, the flip side of that is you have to invest in them too. You
Yes.
have to want to celebrate them too. And then they feel like, oh, wow, like Cristina invested in me. Like I want to invest in her. And that just pays off later in spades. And again, the extra added bonus of a support system.
That's such sage advice. And, again, I truly do believe, like you, it's quality over quantity. And I think, this individuals sometimes get tied up in the whole numbers, right, of my network. I mean, if you look at people's, Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, they're after the numbers and it's like, oh, I have 20,000 followers. And I'm like, yeah, but how many of those do you actually know? Those are like quality relationships. So I do agree with you, quality over quantity. So in final question, thinking about our listeners, what advice would you want to leave them with in terms of helping them continue accelerate their success, especially in this constantly evolving environment and just disruption of technology, AI, and just politics itself? What is your advice?
I think for me, it's been, about following my passion, right? So I went to Georgetown kind of on following my passion of government and politics. I took a side road at Goldman Sachs doing finance, which I am totally happy with and content with in my decisions. But then it was the Elian Gonzalez story that reminded me that I wanted to do politics and policy. And when I got here, kind of fell in love all over again with a whole new profession that I had never heard of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think kind of my advice would be kind of two-pronged. One is to do the thing, to follow your passion, do the thing that you are happy about. I see a lot of folks that go to law school because they're like, oh, I'm going to go be a lawyer. And there are a lot of miserable folks sitting over in law firms, kind of just cranking away and doing their hours and writing their
Yes.
contracts and writing their briefs. But they seem miserable, like, and they don't look like they're enjoying their life. And like, I literally, I mean, I'm excited every day when I wake up and I get out of bed. I'm like, I get to go be a lobbyist again today. Like I get to go on Capitol Hill and talk and convince Senator so-and-so that my client's policy is the right way or whatever. Like I love what I do. And that is, I mean, like you can't put a price on that. Like, so I would encourage folks to kind of find that passion and follow what that passion is. But the second thing is kind of, which sounds a little different than that, is be open to new things because you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean,
Right.
again, I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I had no idea. I didn't know what government and politics were. I didn't know what finance was. And then, I've had these 2 careers where I worked on Wall Street and now I work on K Street. Like those things were foreign. They didn't even exist for me back in Cedar Hill, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and I followed a path and I got here, but like I was willing to try things, and sure, when ABC first called and they said, do you want to go work on Wall Street? I was like, I don't know. But they're like, well, it's 10 grand. Well, at least I opened up myself too. But then once I got there, I was like, holy cow, like this is a whole new world. This is fun. This is sexy. It has changed my whole life, right? I mean, to be
Mm-hmm.
22 years old and working at Goldman Sachs, learning about equity and debt markets and financial markets and how the economy works, it now changed like the way I view the whole rest of the world. Now, when a client comes in, I don't just immediately think policy. I think like, they run a business. They care about this in the market. They trade, their stock goes up and down, right? I'll put every one of my clients' stocks into my phone and I follow it. And I'm like, why is their stock dropping 30% today? Like what just happened? And like following the news stories, it helps put me into a better mindset to understand where they're coming from and what they're going to need. I wouldn't have that perspective if I hadn't been open to working on Wall Street. Same thing with law school. Like I don't actually use my law degree on a daily basis. I don't sit around and write contracts and like go to court or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But law school, more than anything, teaches you to think about life and problems in different ways. They think about like risk and how do you mitigate risk? How can you mitigate around it?
Mm.
And so now, like, I mean, for better or for worse, every time a situation presents itself, I'm like, what are the risks and how can I minimize them? Like, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there ways for me to write something around this or protect against it? Or expose something that's gone wrong, right? And so like law school really changed how I think about that as well. And so like I don't know that I was necessarily looking to go to law school when I was, younger as well. And so, but being open to that because you don't know what you don't know. Again, like you might have like this love of, I do love spreadsheets. I love that Goldman taught me that too. I love Excel. Like I love it. It makes such a great tool, and it makes so much logical sense to me. To somebody who doesn't like reading and prose and what have you, like math and logic makes sense to me. So like Excel does. And it's like, if that does, I mean, that says something about your brain and kind of like how you think about the world. And like, then
Yes.
that translates into a different skill set to kind of give into what your profession might be. And so like, be open to that. Like you be open to trying new things. And then maybe you'll find a new passion that is the passion that you follow, or something that builds on passions that you follow to make them even stronger. And so it's kind of, follow something that you love and is inside yourself, but be open to trying the new things.
That is fantastic. And Cristina, thank you again so much for gracing us with your time. I mean, I think that, our listeners are going to be really left wanting to hear more, or following you and learning more about you. So what is the best way for our audience to follow you, connect with you, and stay on top of what you're doing?
Sure. I'm not a millennial, but I do have like the Instagram and the Twitter, and I have LinkedIn. So LinkedIn professionally is probably the best way to track me down there.
Uh-huh.
I think I've even figured out how to do it to just where it's LinkedIn at Cristina Antelo. So you can find me pretty quickly there. We also have a website for Ferox Strategies. And there's the info line and the phone number there. So you can track me down at feroxstrategies.com.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much for giving us the time and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.